The old upright piano in the corner of the living room had seen better days. Its keys were yellowed with age, and some of them stuck when you pressed them too hard. But to 17-year-old Maya, it was the most precious thing in the world. She'd been playing since she was 4, her tiny fingers barely reaching the keys back then. Maya lived in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Her mom worked 2 jobs, one at the local diner during the day and another cleaning offices at night. Her dad had passed away when she was 10, leaving behind a collection of old jazz records and a love for music that Maya carried in her heart every single day. They didn't have much money. While other kids at school talked about their summer vacations and new phones, Maya counted herself lucky when they could afford to fix the washing machine. But none of that mattered when she sat at that old piano. When her fingers touched those keys, she wasn't poor. She wasn't the girl with the second-hand clothes. She was just free. Her teacher, Mrs. Chen, lived 3 blocks away in a house that smelled like jasmine tea and old books. Mrs. Chen had been a concert pianist once, performing in big cities and fancy theaters. But she'd retired years ago and now taught piano lessons in her cramped living room for $20 an hour. That was all Maya's mom could afford, and even then, sometimes Mrs. Chen would wave away the money with a knowing smile. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Maya would walk to Mrs. Chen's house with her worn sheet music tucked under her arm. While other kids her age were at football games or hanging out at the mall, Maya was learning Chopin and Beethoven, her fingers dancing across Mrs. Chen's beautiful grand piano, a reminder of the teacher's former life. Mrs. Chen was tough. She never let Maya get away with sloppy playing or lazy practice. "Music doesn't lie," she'd say, tapping her wrinkled finger on the sheet music. "If you're not feeling it here," she'd point to her heart, "nobody listening will feel it either." One cold February afternoon, Mrs. Chen showed Maya a flyer she'd printed from the internet. It was an announcement for open auditions at the Hartwell Conservatory in Philadelphia, one of the best music schools in the entire country. Famous pianists had studied there, people who performed at Carnegie Hall and won international competitions. "You should try," Mrs. Chen said simply, pushing the paper across the coffee table. Maya laughed. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of laugh that comes when something seems impossible. "Mrs. Chen, I can't afford that school. Even if they accepted me, which they won't." "They have scholarships," Mrs. Chen replied, her dark eyes serious. "Full scholarships for students with real talent. And you, my dear, have something more important than talent. You have heart." Maya took the flyer home and left it on the kitchen counter. She didn't mention it to her mom at first. Why get her hopes up? Why add another worry to the mountain of worries her mom already carried? But her mom found it anyway. She came into Maya's tiny bedroom that night, still wearing her diner uniform, smelling like coffee and French fries. She sat on the edge of the bed and held up the flyer. "Is this what you want?" she asked quietly. Maya shrugged, trying to seem like it didn't matter. "It's just a long shot, Mom. Forget about it." Her mom was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your dad always told me that the biggest regrets in life aren't the things you try and fail at. They're the things you never try at all." 3 weeks later, Maya's mom handed her an envelope with enough cash for a train ticket to Philadelphia. Maya knew what that money represented. Extra shifts at the diner, skipped lunches, maybe even borrowed money from Aunt Rita. The guilt sat heavy in her stomach, but the hope in her mom's eyes was even heavier. The audition requirements were straightforward. Prepare one classical piece, no longer than 5 minutes. Maya chose a Chopin nocturne she'd been working on for months. It was beautiful and melancholy, with runs that required precision and passages that needed genuine emotion. Mrs. Chen had helped her perfect every measure, every dynamic marking, every subtle pause. Maya practiced until her fingers ached. She played it in the morning before school, during her lunch break in the empty music room, and late at night when the house was quiet. She dreamed about that piece. The notes lived in her head constantly, a soundtrack to her regular life. The day of the audition arrived too quickly and too slowly all at once. Maya wore the nicest dress she owned, a simple navy blue one she'd found at the thrift store, and altered herself. Her mom had bought her new shoes, insisting they couldn't be secondhand for something this important. They'd practiced how to tie her hair back neatly, how to walk confidently, how to smile even when she was nervous. The train ride to Philadelphia took 2 hours. Maya watched the landscape change from rural farmland to suburbs to the bustling city. Her sheet music sat on her lap, and she mouthed the notes silently, her fingers moving in the air as if she were already playing. When she arrived at the conservatory, her breath caught in her throat. The building was magnificent, all stone columns and tall windows with manicured gardens despite the winter cold. Students walked past wearing expensive coats and carrying instrument cases that probably cost more than Maya's entire wardrobe. Inside, the waiting room was packed. At least 30 other students sat nervously, some with their parents, others alone. Maya found an empty chair in the corner and tried to make herself invisible. She listened to the conversations around her. "My instructor studied under Vladimir Ashkenazy," one girl said casually, as if this were normal. "I'm playing the Rachmaninoff Prelude," a boy announced loudly. "The one in C-sharp minor. My teacher says it really shows off technical ability." A group of students compared notes about summer programs in Europe, about private lessons that cost hundreds of dollars per hour, about performances they'd already given at impressive venues. Maya clutched her worn sheet music tighter. Her Chopin nocturne suddenly felt small and inadequate. These weren't just students, they were professionals already. Kids who'd been groomed for success their entire lives. The waiting room slowly emptied as names were called. Maya watched each student disappear through the heavy wooden doors, some returning with smiles, others with tears. The afternoon stretched on endlessly. Finally, after what felt like forever, a woman with a clipboard appeared in the doorway. "Maya Rodriguez," she called, her voice echoing in the now mostly empty room. Maya stood on shaking legs. This was it. This was her one chance. She followed the woman down a long hallway, her new shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The audition hall was nothing like Maya had imagined. She'd pictured something warm and welcoming, maybe with soft lighting and encouraging faces. Instead, she walked into a space that felt more like a courtroom than a music room. The ceiling stretched up impossibly high, making her feel even smaller than she already did. At the far end of the hall sat 3 people behind a long table. They looked important and tired, the kind of tired that comes from listening to the same thing over and over again all day long. Papers were scattered across the table in front of them. Coffee cups sat half empty. One of them was rubbing his temples like he had a headache. In the center of the room, like a dark mountain waiting to be climbed, sat the most beautiful piano Maya had ever seen. It was a Steinway grand piano, its black surface so polished she could see the ceiling lights reflected in it. This wasn't like Mrs. Chen's piano, and it definitely wasn't like the old upright in her living room. This was the kind of piano she'd only ever seen in videos of famous concerts. "Name?" The man in the middle spoke without looking up. He had gray hair and wore glasses that sat low on his nose. His suit looked expensive, and his whole posture screamed that he'd rather be anywhere else. "Maya Rodriguez," she said, and was embarrassed at how small her voice sounded in that huge space. He flipped through some papers, found her name, and made a check mark. "You're the last one today. What are you playing?" "Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, No. 2. Maya had practiced saying this so many times at home, trying to sound confident and professional. For the first time, the man looked up. His eyes swept over her, taking in her thrift store dress, her nervous posture, the way she clutched her sheet music like a life preserver. Something flickered across his face. Not quite pity, but not respect either. It was the look of someone who'd already made up their mind. "I see," he said, and those 2 words somehow contained a whole conversation. He glanced at the other judges, and Maya caught a small shake of his head. Her stomach dropped. She walked toward the piano anyway, because what else could she do? She'd come all this way. Her mom had worked those extra shifts. Mrs. Chen had believed in her. She couldn't just turn around and leave, even though every instinct told her these people had already decided she didn't belong here. The piano bench was exactly the right height. At least that was one thing that went right. Maya set her sheet music on the stand, even though she'd memorized every single note. Her hands hovered over the keys, and she took a deep breath, trying to remember everything Mrs. Chen had taught her. Posture, breathing. Feel the music before you play it. "Miss Rodriguez." The man's voice cut through her concentration like a knife. She looked up, her hands frozen in midair. "It's been a very long day," he said, and now he just sounded exhausted. "We've heard 17 Chopin nocturnes already. 17, all more or less the same." He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Can you sight read?" Maya nodded, confused. Sight reading meant playing something you'd never seen before, reading it as you went. She could do it. Mrs. Chen had made her practice it every lesson. But why was he asking? Good. He started shuffling through a stack of sheet music on the table. The other two judges exchanged glances, but nobody said anything. Finally, he pulled out a piece of paper and walked over to the piano. His footsteps echoed in the quiet hall. He placed the sheet music in front of her, replacing her carefully prepared Chopin. Maya looked down at it and felt her face go hot with embarrassment and confusion. It was a simple melody, the kind of thing a beginner would play in their first year of lessons. Basic notes, simple rhythm, no complexity at all. A child could play this piece. Play this, he said, his voice flat. Let's see if you understand basic technique before we waste time on anything more advanced. The words hit Maya like a slap. Waste time? That's what he thought listening to her would be. A waste of his precious time. She stared at the simple notes on the page, feeling tears prick at her eyes. She'd spent months preparing that Chopin piece. Months. She'd practiced until her fingers hurt, until she could play it in her sleep, until every note sang with the emotion Mrs. Chen had taught her to find. And this man, this important judge who held her future in his hands, didn't even want to hear it. He wanted her to play something a 6-year-old could manage. Maya glanced back at the three judges. The gray-haired man had already returned to his seat and was looking at his phone. The woman on the left was organizing papers. The man on the right stifled a yawn. They weren't expecting anything. They'd already dismissed her before she'd played a single note. And suddenly, Maya felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was anger. Hot, burning anger that started in her stomach and spread through her whole body. She thought about her mom, working until her feet ached, saving money for this train ticket. She thought about Mrs. Chen, spending hours teaching her for almost nothing, believing in her when nobody else did. She thought about her dad's jazz records, the way music had always been the one thing in her life that made sense, that made her feel like she mattered. These people didn't know her. They didn't know where she came from or what she'd sacrificed to be here. They looked at her cheap dress and her worn sheet music and they decided she was nobody. Just another small-town kid who didn't belong in their fancy conservatory. Maya placed her fingers on the keys. They were cool and smooth under her touch. The piano was perfectly tuned, responsive in a way her old upright at home could never be. Even through her anger, she could feel the quality of this instrument. It wanted to sing. It was waiting for someone to show it what it could really do. She looked down at the simple melody one more time. Basic notes arranged in an elementary pattern. Something meant to humble her, to put her in her place. But here's the thing about music that people like that gray-haired judge never understood. It's not about the notes on the page. It's never been about the notes on the page. Music is about what you bring to those notes. It's about the story you tell, the emotions you pour into every sound, the way you can take something simple and transform it into something nobody's ever heard before. Mrs. Chen's voice echoed in Maya's head. Music doesn't lie. If you're not feeling it here, nobody listening will feel it either. Maya was feeling something, all right. She was feeling everything. She began to play the simple melody exactly as written. The notes came out clear and precise, technically perfect. For the first 8 measures, she played it like the beginner's piece it was meant to be. Then her fingers started to move beyond the page. She added a harmony in her left hand, something that complemented the melody but made it richer, deeper. Her right hand began to elaborate on the simple tune, adding grace notes and subtle variations. The basic melody was still there, still recognizable, but now it was growing into something more. Maya's eyes closed. She stopped seeing the music on the page and started seeing the music in her head. All those late nights practicing classical pieces, all those hours listening to her dad's jazz records, all the emotion she'd kept bottled up inside, the frustration, the hope, the determination to prove she was more than what people assumed. It all came pouring out through her fingers. The simple children's tune began to soar. Maya wove in techniques from the Rachmaninoff pieces she'd taught herself from YouTube videos. She added jazz influences, bending notes in ways that classical training alone never taught. Her hands flew across the keys, building something entirely new from the basic melody they'd given her. Behind her, though she couldn't see it, the gray-haired judge's phone had stopped mid-scroll. The papers stopped rustling. 3 pairs of eyes fixed on the girl at the piano, watching something they hadn't expected at all. The music kept building. Maya's fingers moved faster now. more confident, as if they'd been waiting their whole life for this moment. The simple melody that was meant to embarrass her had become something else entirely, something powerful and raw and completely her own. She wasn't thinking anymore about the judges or the fancy hall or even the audition itself. She was just playing, really playing, the way she played late at night when nobody was listening, when it was just her and the piano and the music that lived inside her head. The left hand created a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat, steady and strong underneath everything else. Her right hand danced above it, taking the basic tune and twisting it into something that would make you laugh 1 second and cry the next. She threw in runs that cascaded down the keyboard like water falling. She added chords that rang out with such emotion they seemed to vibrate in the air long after her fingers left the keys. This was everything she'd ever learned coming together at once. The classical training from Mrs. Chen, the jazz feelings from her dad's old records that she'd listened to 1,000 times, the sadness of losing him, the pride in watching her mom work so hard, the frustration of never having enough money, the stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, she could be something more than what everyone expected. It all went into the music. Maya's whole body moved with the piano now. She swayed slightly, leaned into the harder passages, pulled back during the softer moments. This wasn't the stiff formal playing she'd practiced for her Chopin piece. This was real. This was honest. This was her heart completely exposed for anyone to see. Behind her, the hall had gone completely silent. That tired, end-of-the-day energy had vanished. The gray-haired judge sat frozen, his phone forgotten on the table. The woman judge had both hands pressed to her mouth. The third judge leaned so far forward in his chair he looked like he might fall off. But Maya didn't know any of this. Her eyes were closed, her mind somewhere else entirely. She was in the small living room at home with the old upright piano. She was in Mrs. Chen's house with the jasmine tea smell. She was everywhere music had ever mattered to her all at once. The piece grew bigger and more complex. Maya added sections that felt almost like a conversation. The melody asking questions, the harmony answering them. She built tension, holding back, making the listener wait, and then releasing it in cascades of notes that seemed impossible to play, but somehow flowed perfectly under her fingers. She incorporated techniques she'd learned from watching concert videos online. Little tricks and flourishes that famous pianists used but made them her own. She bent the tempo, speeding up during exciting parts and slowing way down for the emotional moments. Some classical teachers would have hated this freedom, this willingness to break the rules. But right now the rules didn't matter. Only the truth mattered, and the truth was pouring out of that piano like nothing any of them had ever heard. Maya thought about all the kids in the waiting room with their expensive clothes and famous teachers. She thought about how small they'd made her feel, how out of place. But music didn't care about any of that. Music didn't care if your dress came from a thrift store, or if you'd never been to Europe, or if your teacher charged $20 instead of $200. Music only cared if you meant it, and she meant every single note. The improvisation reached its peak. Maya's hands flew across the entire keyboard, from the deepest bass notes to the highest treble, creating a sound so full and rich it seemed impossible that one person could produce it. The simple melody was still there, woven through everything like a thread, but now it carried the weight of something profound, something that spoke to anyone who'd ever felt overlooked or underestimated or told they weren't good enough. She began to bring it back down, softer now, gentler. The anger had burned itself out, replaced by something else. Not sadness exactly, but maybe acceptance. Maybe peace. The notes became sparser, more delicate. She let silence have space between the sounds, understanding that quiet could be just as powerful as loud. The original melody returned, simple again, but now it felt different, like it had been on a journey and come back changed. Maya played it with such tenderness, such care that it almost hurt to listen to. She added the smallest embellishments, little grace notes that felt like memories or whispers or goodbyes. And then, after what felt like both forever and no time at all, she played the final chord. It rang out clear and true, filling every corner of that enormous hall. Maya kept her hands on the keys even after the sound faded, her fingers still touching the ivory, her eyes still closed, her breath coming in quick gasps like she'd been running. For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence was so complete Maya could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Slowly, carefully, she opened her eyes and lifted her hands from the piano. Reality came crashing back. The judges. The audition. What had she done? She'd been asked to play a simple piece, and instead she'd, what? Shown off? Made a fool of herself? Let her emotions completely take over? The panic hit her all at once. Her hands started shaking for real now, trembling so badly she had to grip the edge of the piano bench. She'd ruined everything. She'd let her anger get the better of her, and now these important people probably thought she was crazy or disrespectful or completely unprofessional. Maya forced herself to look back at the judges' table, ready to see disappointment or worse, that same dismissive expression from before, ready to gather her sheet music and run out of there and never think about this humiliating moment again. But what she saw made her freeze completely. The gray-haired judge was standing up, slowly, like he was moving through water or waking up from a dream. His expression wasn't angry or dismissive anymore. It was something Maya couldn't quite read, something intense and strange and completely unexpected. He started walking toward the piano. His footsteps echoed in the silent hall. Click, 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 each one making Maya's heart beat faster. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only sit there and watch him approach, her mind racing through every terrible possibility. He was going to yell at her. He was going to tell her to leave. He was going to lecture her about following instructions and respecting the audition process and staying in her lane. The woman judge was crying. Actually crying, tears running down her face as she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The third judge just sat there with his mouth slightly open, looking stunned. Maya wanted to disappear. To sink through the floor and never be seen again, this was worse than not being good enough. This was being so far out of line that she'd actually moved a judge to tears, probably from disappointment or frustration or second-hand embarrassment. The gray-haired man reached the piano. He stood there for a moment, just looking at Maya like he was trying to figure something out. She couldn't meet his eyes. She stared at her lap instead, at her hands still trembling, at the simple dress she'd been so proud of this morning and now felt so stupid wearing. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, and his voice was quiet, soft even, nothing like the harsh, tired tone from before. Maya forced herself to look up at him. This was it. The moment where he told her she'd blown her chance. The talent meant nothing without discipline, that she should go back to her small town and forget about schools like this. But when she met his eyes, what she saw there wasn't anger at all. It was something she'd never expected to see in her entire life. The man's stern face had completely transformed. His eyes were bright, not with tears but with something else, something that looked almost like wonder. When he spoke again, his voice carried an emotion that made Maya's chest tighten. "In 30 years," he said slowly, carefully, like he was choosing each word with great precision, "I have listened to thousands and thousands of students play the piano." He paused, and Maya held her breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "What you just did," he continued, shaking his head slightly as if he couldn't quite believe it himself, "that wasn't just playing notes on a page." Another pause. The woman judge was openly sobbing now. The third judge had stood up too, moving closer to see better. "That was music itself," he said, and now Maya could see that his hands were shaking slightly too. "That was everything I've spent my entire career hoping to hear." Maya sat there completely stunned, trying to process what the judge had just said. Music itself. Everything he'd hoped to hear. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't be real. Maybe she'd misheard him. Maybe the stress and anxiety had finally broken her brain and she was imagining things. But the judge was still standing there, still looking at her with that intense expression. He turned slightly toward the other judges and gestured for them to come closer. The woman judge practically ran over, still wiping tears from her face. The third judge followed, moving like he was in some kind of trance. "Do you understand what just happened?" the gray-haired man asked Maya, his voice still soft but urgent now, like he needed her to grasp something important. Maya shook her head. She didn't understand anything. Her brain felt fuzzy and slow, like she was underwater. The judge pulled up a chair and sat down right next to the piano, which seemed strange and informal for someone who'd been so cold and professional before. He looked at her directly, and she could see now that his eyes were actually kind. Maybe they'd always been kind and she'd just been too nervous to notice. "That simple piece I gave you," he said, "it wasn't meant to insult you." "It felt like it was," Maya said quietly, surprising herself with her honesty. He nodded, accepting that. I know, and I'm sorry for how I presented it. But here's the truth. That piece is a test we give to every single student who auditions here. Not a test of whether you can play simple notes. Any trained monkey can do that. The woman judge let out a small laugh through her tears. Professor Hartwell, really, she said, but she was smiling. So this was Professor Hartwell. Maya's stomach dropped even further. He wasn't just any judge, he was the Hartwell, the one the entire conservatory was named after. His family had founded this place over 100 years ago. He was a legend in the classical music world. It's a test of musical intelligence, Professor Hartwell continued, of creativity, of courage. Most students, and I mean 99% of them, play that simple piece exactly as written. They're so afraid to make a mistake, so worried about following the rules perfectly that they don't dare add anything of their own. They play it correctly and safely, and we thank them and they leave. He leaned forward slightly. But once in a very great while, a student sees beyond the notes on that page. They understand that music isn't about reproduction, it's about creation. It's about taking something, anything, and making it speak to the human heart. Maya felt tears starting in her own eyes now. She didn't know what to do with all these feelings crashing over her. You didn't just play that melody. The third judge spoke up for the first time. His voice was warm and enthusiastic. You transformed it. You took a beginner's exercise and turned it into something that made me forget where I was, forget what I was supposed to be evaluating. You made me feel something real. The technical skill was impressive, the woman judge added, moving closer. The way you incorporated different styles, the complexity you built, that takes years of training and practice. But more than that, you played with such honesty, such vulnerability. That can't be taught. Professor Hartwell stood up and walked back to the judge's table. He picked up a folder and returned, flipping it open. Maya Rodriguez, age 17, student of Catherine Chen. No previous competitions, no performances at major venues, no awards or recognitions. He looked up at her. Your application was one of the weakest we received this year, at least on paper. Maya's face burned with shame. She knew her application had been bare compared to others. No impressive resume, no fancy credentials to list. And yet, Professor Hartwell continued, Catherine Chen wrote you a recommendation letter that was 3 pages long. She called you the most naturally gifted student she'd taught in 40 years of teaching. She said you had something that couldn't be measured by competitions or certificates, a direct line between your soul and the music. He closed the folder and looked at Maya again. I almost dismissed that letter as the enthusiasm of a teacher who was too close to her student, too emotionally invested to be objective. I thought Mrs. Chen was being overly generous because of your circumstances. Maya felt a surge of defensive anger on Mrs. Chen's behalf, but Professor Hartwell held up his hand. I was wrong, he said simply. She wasn't being generous. If anything, she was understating your abilities. What you demonstrated today is beyond rare. It's the kind of gift that comes along maybe once in a generation. The room started spinning a little. Maya gripped the piano bench harder, trying to anchor herself to something solid. Now, I need to tell you something else, Professor Hartwell said, and his tone became more serious. Something you need to understand before we go any further. Maya's brief moment of hope flickered. Here it came. The catch, the bad news, the reason why none of this would matter in the end. The path you're on, if you choose to pursue music professionally, it's brutal, he said bluntly. It's not like in the movies where talent gets discovered and everything becomes easy. Even with a gift like yours, you'll face rejection. You'll face critics who don't understand what you're trying to do. You'll face financial struggles because, let's be honest, classical music doesn't make most people rich. He paused, making sure she was really listening. You'll face people who will look at where you come from and make assumptions about what you're capable of. Some will underestimate you like I did today. Others will expect you to fail, almost wanting you to fail because your success makes them uncomfortable. Maya nodded slowly. She'd already experienced some of that today, and she was only 17. But here's what I also know, Professor Hartwell said, and now his voice grew stronger, more passionate. The world needs what you have. Not the technique. Technique can be learned. Not even the creativity. There are plenty of creative musicians out there. The world needs your specific voice, your specific way of understanding and expressing emotion through sound. He gestured around the empty hall. This conservatory has produced hundreds of technically perfect pianists who go on to have perfectly fine careers. They join orchestras, they teach, they perform at respectable venues. And that's wonderful. But they're not the ones who change music. They're not the ones who make people hear something familiar in a completely new way. The woman judge stepped forward. What Professor Hartwell is trying to say, perhaps too dramatically, she said with a gentle smile, is that we would like to offer you a full scholarship to the Hartwell Conservatory. The words hung in the air. Maya heard them, but they didn't quite land. They seemed to float somewhere above her head, refusing to sink in and become real. A full scholarship, Professor Hartwell repeated. Tuition, room, board, all of it, plus a stipend for books, supplies, and personal expenses. We have a fund specifically for students of exceptional talent who might not otherwise be able to attend. We'd also like to arrange for you to study with Professor Hartwell personally, the third judge added. He only takes on 2 or 3 private students per year, and he's already told us he wants to work with you. Maya opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her throat felt tight, and her eyes were definitely crying now, tears rolling down her cheeks in a way she couldn't control or hide. I know it's overwhelming, the woman judge said kindly, pulling a chair over and sitting down beside Maya. You don't have to answer right now. Take the information packet home. Talk to your family. Talk to Mrs. Chen. Think about what you want. But Maya was already shaking her head, not in refusal but in disbelief. My mom, she managed to say, her voice cracking. My mom worked extra shifts at the diner to buy my train ticket here. She believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Then she's a wise woman, Professor Hartwell said, though I suspect she already knew what we just discovered. Mothers usually do. Maya thought about her mom waiting at home, probably pacing around the kitchen, checking her phone every 5 minutes to see if Maya had texted with news. She'd been so worried, so hopeful, trying to hide both feelings behind a brave smile when Maya left this morning. Mrs. Chen too, Maya added. She taught me for almost nothing. She gave me so much, and I never knew how to thank her properly. The best thanks you can give a teacher, the woman judge said, is to become everything they believed you could be. And then some. Professor Hartwell extended his hand for a handshake. Maya stood up on shaky legs and took it. His grip was firm and warm. Welcome to Hartwell Conservatory, Miss Rodriguez, he said. I have a feeling you're going to turn this place upside down, in the best possible way. As Maya gathered her things, her worn sheet music, her small purse, the coat she'd borrowed from her aunt, she felt like she was in a dream. The 3 judges walked her to the door, talking about orientation schedules and housing arrangements and things that seemed impossibly far in the future. At the threshold, Maya turned back one more time to look at that beautiful Steinway piano. The piano where everything had changed, where she'd taken the biggest risk of her life and somehow, impossibly, it had paid off. Professor Hartwell noticed her looking. That piano has been played by hundreds of students, he said quietly, but very few have made it sing like you did today. I won't forget that sound for the rest of my life. Maya walked out into the hallway, clutching the packet of information they'd given her. Her legs felt strange, like they weren't quite connected to her body properly. The building that had seemed so intimidating when she arrived now felt different. Still impressive, still beautiful, but maybe, just maybe, like a place where she belonged. The train ride home felt completely different from the morning journey. Maya sat by the same window, watching the same landscape roll by in reverse, but everything had changed. She kept pulling out the acceptance packet to make sure it was real, that the words were actually printed there in black and white. Full scholarship, personal instruction with Professor Hartwell, housing included. It was real. It was all real. She'd tried calling her mom 3 times from the train station, but it kept going to voicemail. Her mom was probably still at work, phone tucked away in her locker like always. So Maya sat with this enormous news bursting inside her, with nobody to tell, feeling like she might explode from the pressure of keeping it in. When the train finally pulled into her small town station, the sun was setting. The platform was nearly empty, just a few people waiting for rides. And there, parked in the small lot, was her mom's old car with her mom leaning against it, still wearing her diner uniform. The moment Maya stepped off the train, she saw her mom's face. That expression of hope mixed with fear, trying to read Maya's body language from a distance to guess how it had gone. Maya had planned to walk calmly to the car, to explain everything properly and sensibly. Instead, she ran. Actually ran across the platform with her bag bouncing against her hip, the acceptance packet clutched in her hand. I got in. The words burst out before she even reached her mom. Mom, I got in. Full scholarship. Everything paid for. Her mom's face went through about 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. Confusion, then understanding, then disbelief, then joy so pure and bright it made her look 10 years younger. She caught Maya in a hug so tight it almost hurt. And they stood there in the parking lot crying and laughing at the same time. "Tell me everything," her mom said, pulling back to look at Maya's face, touching her cheeks like she needed to make sure she was really there. "From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." They sat in the car in that parking lot for an hour while Maya told the whole story. The intimidating waiting room, the dismissive judge, the simple piece that was supposed to humiliate her but turned into something else entirely. Her mom listened to every word, gasping at the right moments, getting angry when Maya described feeling dismissed, and crying again when Maya got to the part about the scholarship offer. "Your father would be so proud," her mom said, wiping her eyes with a napkin from the glove compartment. "He always knew you had something special. Even when you were tiny, banging on that old piano, he'd say, 'That girl's got music in her soul.'" They drove home slowly, both of them too emotional to want the moment to end. When they pulled up to their small house, Maya noticed Mrs. Chen sitting on her own porch 3 houses down, like she'd been watching for their return. Maya got out of the car and walked over. Mrs. Chen stood up, her face carefully neutral, but her hands were gripping the porch railing tight. "Well," Mrs. Chen said, and her voice was steady, but Maya could hear the question underneath. The hope, the fear of disappointment. Maya didn't say anything. She just held out the acceptance packet. Mrs. Chen took it with trembling hands. She opened it slowly, carefully, like it might dissolve if she moved too fast. Her eyes scanned the first page, and Maya watched as her teacher's composed expression finally cracked. Mrs. Chen pressed the packet to her chest and closed her eyes. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew they would see what I see." "You were right about everything," Maya said, her own voice shaky. "The test, the simple piece, you'd prepared me for it without even telling me. All those times you made me improvise, made me add my own feelings to the music instead of just playing the notes. You knew." Mrs. Chen opened her eyes and looked at Maya with such pride it was almost hard to meet her gaze. "I didn't know for certain. I just knew that if they had any wisdom at all, they would recognize real talent when they heard it. And if they didn't, well, that would have been their loss, not yours." They talked on that porch until it got dark, Mrs. Chen asking questions about the judges and the facility and the program. When Maya mentioned that Professor Hartwell wanted to teach her personally, Mrs. Chen actually laughed out loud. "Edmund Hartwell," she said, shaking her head. "I studied under him for 2 years back in the 80s. He's difficult and demanding and will push you harder than you've ever been pushed. But he only works with students he believes in completely. This is a very big deal, Maya." The next few months passed in a blur of preparation. There were forms to fill out, arrangements to make, things to buy and pack. The whole town seemed to hear about Maya's scholarship. And suddenly people she barely knew were congratulating her at the grocery store or the post office. The local newspaper ran a story about her with a picture of her at Mrs. Chen's piano. The community center held a small fundraiser concert, asking Maya to perform, and she played for a packed room of neighbors and teachers and people who'd watched her grow up. She played her Chopin Nocturne, the one she'd prepared but never got to perform at the audition, and the audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted so long she didn't know what to do with her hands. Her mom's co-workers at the diner pooled money to buy Maya a laptop for school. Mrs. Chen gave her a beautiful leather journal with blank staff paper inside for composing. Even her old middle school music teacher sent a card with a $20 bill inside and a note that said, "I always knew you were special, but the hardest part was saying goodbye." The night before Maya left for the conservatory, she sat at the old upright piano in her living room one last time. The keys were still yellowed and some still stuck slightly. But this piano had been her first teacher, her constant companion, her refuge during hard times. She played softly, not wanting to wake her mom, who had work early the next morning. She played the simple melody from the audition, the one that had changed everything. It sounded different on this old piano, less polished, less perfect. But somehow that made it more honest. This was where she'd learned to love music. This was where it had all started. Maya heard a sound and turned to see her mom standing in the doorway in her bathrobe watching. Couldn't sleep either, her mom asked, coming to sit on the couch. Maya shook her head. "It's weird. I've been dreaming about leaving this town my whole life. But now that it's actually happening, I'm scared. Her mom nodded. That's normal. You're allowed to be excited and scared at the same time. They're not opposites. They usually come together when something really matters. What if I'm not good enough? Maya asked, voicing the fear that had been growing louder as the departure date got closer. What if that audition was just a lucky day and I can't do it again? What if everyone there is better than me? Her mom was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, You know what your father used to tell me when I was worried about something? He'd say that courage isn't about not being scared. Courage is being scared and doing it anyway because you believe in something bigger than your fear. She came over and sat next to Maya on the piano bench, the way she used to when Maya was little and learning her first songs. You have a gift, baby, not just for playing piano but for making people feel something real when they hear you. That's rare. That's precious. And yes, it's scary to put yourself out there, to risk failing in front of people who matter. But you know what's scarier? Never trying. Never knowing what you could have been. Maya leaned her head on her mom's shoulder, breathing in the familiar smell of her shampoo and the diner coffee that seemed permanently embedded in her clothes. I'm going to make you proud, Maya said. Her mom kissed the top of her head. You already have. Every single day of your life you've made me proud. This scholarship, this fancy school, it's wonderful and you earned it. But you're not worth more to me now than you were before. You understand that, right? Maya nodded, feeling tears start again. She'd cried more in the past few months than in her entire life combined. The next morning, they loaded up the car with Maya's suitcases and boxes. The drive to the conservatory took 3 hours. Her mom insisted on coming inside to see the dorm room, to meet Maya's roommate, to make sure everything was safe and good. She hugged Maya goodbye at least 5 times, kept remembering one more thing she wanted to say. Finally, Maya walked her mom back to the car. They stood there in the parking lot, neither wanting to be the first to let go. You call me anytime, her mom said, day or night. If you're happy, if you're sad, if you just want to hear my voice, you call. I will, Maya promised. And remember, her mom started, then stopped, getting choked up. She took a breath and tried again. Remember that no matter how far you go or how successful you become, you're still my girl. You're still the kid who used to play made-up songs on that old piano and dance around the living room. Don't lose that, okay? Don't let anyone make you into someone you're not. Maya hugged her one last time, holding on tight, trying to memorize this feeling of safety and home. After her mom drove away, Maya stood in that parking lot for a while, watching the car disappear. Then she turned and looked at the conservatory building. The same building that had seemed so intimidating months ago now looked different. It looked like possibility, like the beginning of something she couldn't quite imagine yet but was ready to discover. Years later, when Maya had become an accomplished pianist performing at concert halls around the world, she would still remember that audition as the moment everything changed. Not because she'd played perfectly, she hadn't, not because she'd followed the rules, she'd broken them, completely, but because she'd been brave enough to play, from her heart instead of from her fear. She'd taken a piece meant to humble her and turned it into something honest and true and completely her own. And that, she would tell her own students someday, was what music was really about. Not playing what was expected, not being perfect, but having the courage to let people hear who you really were, one note at a time.